So let's go deeper on the political aspect of global climate change. People see the changes and feel the blistering heat, but it's hard to get anything accomplished without our elected leaders stepping in. Joining me now from Brooklyn to talk about it is Chloe Demrovsky. She's president and CEO of Disaster Recovery Institute International. Her nonprofit helps organizations prepare for and recover from disasters. Chloe, thanks for coming on.
It's my pleasure, Natalie.
Well, last week, the Democratic senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, said he would not support his party's sweeping environmental legislation. Without his vote, it won't go through. And today, the president said climate change is an emergency, but he stopped short of declaring a formal climate emergency. How much of the party's environmental agenda do you hope to see, or can anyone hope to see the president get pushed through?
There's been a lot of pressure on President Biden to declare an emergency from some of the left-wing, progressive wing of his party. And that's in part just to try to get him to declare his commitment to addressing the issue of climate change, which he certainly ran on. But declaring an emergency is actually a technical, legal action that would free up about 100 different actions that he could take to address something, but it's not clear that it would actually make a big difference for him in terms of what he can and cannot do on climate change. And it would actually tie it up with definitely in the courts, because the courts had already ruled, the Supreme Court ruled in a ruling on West Virginia versus EPA very recently that they wanted to limit the EPA's ability to regulate greenhouse gas emissions specifically. They certainly wouldn't take very kindly to using an emergency declaration to deal with something like climate change. So while there is pressure on him to use something technical like that, it's not clear that it would actually make a difference and create any action on climate change. There are some hopeful and positive things to think about, though, which is that we've almost entirely forgotten about the infrastructure bill that was passed last year as well. That was over $1 trillion for infrastructure. And so if there is a lot of attention paid to how that money gets spent, that can certainly be spent on infrastructure projects that would address climate change as well, green infrastructure projects, and also those things that will help us to adapt to, like the searing heat wave that we're seeing right now that you just covered, so we can adapt to the effects of climate change as well as mitigating, the causes of climate change.
Yeah, well, we're glad that people like you stay close to the nitty-gritty of all these issues because it is complex, and the different interests that are involved in all of these issues. Without government, where are we as far as cities doing things, states doing things, businesses taking things in their own hands?
Well, you hit it there exactly, because the federal government is not the only actor that can drive action. They were just sort of looking to create a kind of cohesive landscape for the nation as a whole to follow. But a lot of this does get addressed at the state and the city level, at the local level, at the tribal level. This is where specific actions can be taken. And a lot is being done at the state and local level to address climate change. And it has been happening over the last many years. There's also a lot happening on the business side. There's a lot of drive by investors to see action in terms of what is being done by companies that they're investing in to address climate change, and also what their exposure is to risks from climate change. So we are seeing a lot of action there, and perhaps there are ways that government can support some of that action. There is actually bipartisan support for some of it. Once you get down below the kind of top level issue of saying this is climate change, we're dealing with tomorrow's problem by hurting us today, and that's where you get into kind of the political the problems with dealing with it. But when you get into the specifics of how you address it, there is more kind of traction for getting something done there.
Well, with the heat that we're seeing right now, what's the big concern for cities that are trying to cope with this?
Well, they definitely need money for dealing with the disastrous impacts of addressing heat. The way that they do that is through public cooling centers, for example, in the immediate, to address the immediate effects. If people don't have air conditioners, if they break down, they'll give them a center where they can go, whether it's a library or firehouse or somewhere where that they can have fans and air conditioners and water available for people, getting the word out that that's available for people, because it really does have life-threatening impacts on many communities. And in the sort of medium term, there's a lot more that we can do to, say, plant more trees in our cities, to paint roofs white, to retrofit buildings to make sure that they can cool more efficiently and more effectively. So we need to start thinking about some of those things, because clearly this isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of these aren't that big of a deal. Painting roofs white, green roofs too. Thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate what you do. Chloe Demrovsky, thanks.
My pleasure, Natalie.
Have a good night.